Welcome to Collective SOULversations. I'm Jody Jones, and I'm thrilled to have you join me on this amazing journey exploring spirituality, healing, and personal growth. With over 15 years of experience as a psychic medium and energy healer, I've made it my mission to help people connect with their true selves, and I can't wait to share this journey with you. In every episode, I chat with incredible guests who bring their own unique stories and insights to the table. We dive into different tools and practices that can help support you on your path of self-discovery. So whether you're just starting out or you've been in this journey for a while, Collective SOULversations is all about creating a friendly and welcoming space for us to explore the mysteries of the soul together. So grab your favorite cup of tea, get comfy, and let's dive into this enlightening adventure together. Hey everybody, welcome to Collective SOULversations. I am your host, Jody Jones, and I have a guest that we've had on here before. So I'm going to read his bio for you guys so that you guys get to know a little bit about him, and then we'll start our SOULversation and you guys will get to know him a lot more. So I have Garry Diggins with us today. And Garry Diggins began his musical career in the Detroit area, working as an opening act for performers ranging from Alice Cooper to Sly and the Family Stone. In his early 20s, Garry met a Colombian shaman that encounter shifted his orientation from the performing arts to a study of the healing arts. And for the past 4 decades, he has maintained an expressive arts practice that blends the therapeutic use of sound with spiritual director counseling. He calls his work Soundwork as Soulwork. As an educator, Garry has taught internationally at various learning institutes and universities, and Garry has written 5 books related to music as medicine. His current guidebook is entitled Liminality, Traversing the In-Between. Garry plays a range of acoustic instruments collected from around the world. His musical collaborations have taken him to India, Africa, Europe, South Korea, Israel, and throughout North America, including a performance at New York's Carnegie Hall. Garry and his family currently live on a rural property near Meaford, Ontario, with 3 cats and a dog named Sita. Welcome, Garry. Welcome back to the show.
Good to be with you on this snowy day.
Yeah, we were just talking about this. So we live very close to each other relatively. So we're Southern Ontario. We have been, I feel like everybody's saying we've been hit by snow overnight, but I feel like we've been hit by snow since November.
Feels like that, doesn't it?
It
My
does.
goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're definitely living in a winter wonderland. I'm thankful for the sunshine, though. I'm thankful that the sun comes in on these cold days.
Yeah, I think we can bear the white stuff as long as the sun is shining.
Exactly, exactly. That's a big difference. It's funny because I'm originally from Saskatchewan. I was born in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and grew up in Regina. And of course, Saskatchewan has winter for like 9 months out of the year. But they have so much sun. There's always like they have I think, they have way more sun than Ontario has. So even though it's like minus 40, the
Uh,
sun is out, so it makes it more bearable. And I know that for me that was such a transition when I moved to Ontario of not having as much sun because I'm such a sun baby that I
hmm.
was like, I like, where's the sun, people? Like, okay, you have no snow, but where's your sun?
Yeah, and I think it does affect us in northern climes in terms of seasonal affective disorder, right?
Oh yeah.
And I do think there are mood aspects that shift and change, not only with the lunar cycles, but with those seasonal cycles as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we underestimate the power and the connectedness that we have with this planet, with the solar cycle, with the moon cycle, with all of that. It's it's hard to believe that you know we could be unaffected by things that are so massive, right? Like in energy and power and space.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and the extremes right now are really stark and dramatic. I have an older son who lives in LA and had to evacuate during the fires.
Right.
And so that was a very significant time for not only him, but that community up in the Beverly Hills area. And uh, we had regular conversations as to how he was doing. I mean, imagine having to make those critical decisions as to what you leave behind and what you pack in your car. It kind
Right.
of brings you to essence, right?
Yeah.
And fortunately, his house was not damaged, but the impact and the imprint of that caused me to ask him, look, how are you doing post-event?
Right.
And uh, as a Canadian, he said, I'm playing hockey 3 nights a week. Just kind of
Found
discharge.
an outlet to let go
Yes.
of the
But I
trauma.
thought the other thing that was less whimsical was the fact that he said, I'm volunteering.
Right.
So those who were affected certainly needed helping hands from the community. And I think, that circumstance brought out the best and the worst in humanity.
Right.
And you had people risking their lives, and you had others breaking into abandoned homes. So it it really shows you that um, we as human beings are quite a mix of shadow and light.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes total sense. And it's also, I love the way that that will kind of tie into what our conversation will be around today, because when we, I feel like it's another thing that we, don't give enough weight to, is also how we process traumatic experiences.
Yeah.
And being like, there's so many things that we go through in life that we just have to, carry on, keep chopping wood, carrying water. Because we need to do that. But there's such a traumatic frequency that becomes stored in our being.
Mm.
And unless we find ways intuitively to be able to work through that, it's affecting, it's life altering, and it affects us. And so your son's out there playing hockey. That's a great way, because of course stored trauma in the body needs to be expressed and through movement and yelling and hitting the hockey puck.
Yes, right. Yeah, I worked in this community in Uganda in the Gulu region, and these were kids who were kidnapped at gunpoint and forced to be a part of a rogue army called the LRA, the Lord's Resistant Army, and they were forced to do terrible atrocities, kind of kill or be killed. And after they escaped or they were captured by the Ugandan army or the United Nations forces, um, they couldn't return home. So there they were in these kind of limbo states. And a wonderful man gave them a place called Hope North. And one of the things that um, I noticed was a daily part of their regime was playing soccer. So again, that discharge of bodily trauma rather than, it seems in our Western approach to therapy, we rely a lot on talk therapy.
Right.
What happened to you? Describe that. How are you?
Right.
Now, those
Yeah.
kinds of things, and it has its place.
Right.
But I do think much more experiential and more embodied elements are really important to the healing process.
Yeah. And it's one of the things that I'm on my healing journey, at right now. And I believe our entire existence as souls is a healing journey. I believe it's the
Yeah.
in its entirety. And for me, one of the things I'm coming into the exploration of right now is the understanding and knowing that for many of us, when we experience anything that's traumatic, we escape into the mind.
Mm,
right?
mhm.
And that's where that disconnect with the body and the mind happens
Right.
without us knowing it. And then when we do know that, okay, so something traumatic's happened, we experience this, we go and we do talk therapy,
Yeah.
where again, we're engaging with the mind. We're just, we're, and again, we're leaving the body out of the equation. And I feel like for so many of us, myself included, that's why talk therapy, traditional talk therapies don't necessarily help as much as they could. And, when we bring in the aspect of the body and stored trauma, I
Mm.
feel like that's when it's pivotal to having that shift.
Yes, definitely. I mean, we probably all heard stories of individuals who, thought everything was fine. They went to the massage therapist or the osteopath, and they're having some body work, and suddenly the memory banks open, and
Mm-hmm.
those elements that were stored in the body want release, not just to be felt, but to be cultivated and processed. And
Yeah.
I think we're onto something here that our society has to find ways to help people drop down to other levels of being, or um, embrace other practices that engage the earth body.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, and both of us are fortunate to live in fairly small communities, but close to the proximity of nature. I mean,
Right.
I can walk out these fields here, and I'm on the Bruce Trail, and there's something so medicinal about just walking that path, and pausing and allowing myself to not just be an observer or a hiker, but to be impacted by what is coming to me in terms of energy. I helped a man, two of us were helping a man who was having a heart attack recently, and it was pretty intense because it looked like he had gone,
Oh
and we
my.
were doing, traditional CPR
Yeah.
uh, until the paramedics arrived, and he was revived, but it was one of those intense situations. And the friend that I was with, as soon as the paramedics took over and it looked like the pros had it, uh,
Right.
we kind of gave them space, and I watched him, and he walked outside, and the first thing he did was to hug a tree, just to
Wow.
give all that intense, stressful, anxious energy
Yeah.
over to the tree.
Wow. Very
Yeah,
intuitive. That's
yeah,
great.
it's
Yeah.
brilliant. Yeah,
Well, if you look at animals, and their in their simplicity, they're not in the mind. They're very full, fully embodied. Whenever they come into any kind of experience that is less than ideal, they shake it off. They literally, oftentimes, I don't know if you'll notice, with I call my dogs my therapy dogs, because oftentimes I will, like be petting them and embracing them, and seconds later they'll walk away and they do this big shake, and I don't take it personally because I feel like they intuitively know, okay, I brought in all those frequencies, I've helped her out, but now we release them. We can't hang on to them, right?
yeah, yeah. And it's brilliant sometimes when we're bedridden because we've got the flu or something,
Right.
and either a cat or dog just
Yep.
intuitively comes in and
Yes.
snuggles or
And
cuddles.
lays with you. Yes, we have our cat George who does that.
Yeah,
Yeah, especially you'll notice, especially with animals, they're very, especially cats, for sensitivities, right? Like if I'm having a sad day, or there's George like laying right beside me and purring, and right, and
yes.
helping me to transmute all of that density.
Yeah.
So they're
Yeah,
very
I feel this is really what we're at as a species, as a body of humanity, to recognize this interconnectivity of all life forms. We've been conditioned to think of ourselves as the higher species, or
right,
dominion over
right.
everything, and we've done a piss poor job of being stewards. And
Yes.
I think because of that kind of mental um, concept or belief that we are superior to other forms of life, and that is, I think, uh, kind of depositing us at a place where we have to really examine that and think through the the kind of weave, almost like Baroque music, the way that our lives are so entwined with not just the terrestrial, but the celestial as well.
Absolutely.
Uh,
I was going to ask you, so
hmm,
for a long time now, it came across my path of, more clues as to, well, why I feel this way, or why my body responds to this. And this was the understanding of how the Schumann resonance work. Are you familiar with the Schumann resonance at all?
no.
So the Schumann resonance is the vibrational measurement of the Earth's core.
Ah,
So everything carrying a vibrational frequency that we can actually measure, right? The Earth's core has a base frequency of 7.8 hertz. So
hmm,
that's kind of like, and so in the spiritual aspect of that, we think about Mother Gaia,
yeah.
and the center of the earth being her heart or her heartbeat. And it's very interesting because we'll notice that there will be shifts in the Schumann resonance, so the measurement of this frequency. And just as an example, we just had a full moon last night. So we had the first full moon of 2025.
Hmm,
So the full moon energy is very intense, right? It's about shining the light, bringing to surface all of the stuff that needs to be worked and cleared on. And interesting, this particular full moon cycle was like, and usually there's like a window 3 days before, 3 days after, give or take, that people start to feel it. And this one was so intense. It was from, talking to clients, talking to people, it was so intense in so many different ways for so many people. And interestingly enough, today, the Schumann is spiking. So we call them Schumann spikes. So it's hit a power of 81 hertz. So imagine you're going from 7.8 to 81 hertz. That's a massive amount of energy. And spirit always shows me it's as if this very nurturing, powerful female energy wakes up and shakes and just does this, like, like the idea of how when a dog gets a flea off, like it shakes the fleas off of the. And I feel like that resonance from the earth comes in to help us. It's like we purged all of this stuff, all of this darkness, all of the stuff came up, and then there's our mother earth
hmm,
shaking us.
hmm.
So to help us to move and again, knowing that we need that flow, it's not a conversation we can have. We can't sit there and talk about it. We need to actually bring some physical movement in.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's auspicious that you bring this up because I get affected by lunar cycles, especially the full moon ones.
Yeah.
And not last night, but the night before, my partner Catherine said, "Let's pull the blind open so we can feel the lunar energy and really
Yeah. Yeah.
be in that lunar cycle."
Right.
Uh, I hardly got a wink. And my dream life was,
Yes.
so activated. So last night we didn't open the blinds, but still I found myself just in activation mode. In fact, I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning, thinking it was like seven or so. And
Right. Right.
yeah, and the other thing that you bring up about Gaia, kind of reminded me that often our romantic idea of Earth and Gaia and the natural world tends to be fairly romanticized and idealized.
Right.
and it kind of um, it overrides this primordial force that is present at all levels, like the dog that shakes off
Right. Yes.
or the energy.
Yes.
Every once in a while, we get a taste of what that primary power entails, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
I think it should rise in us a feeling of deep respect for this power and life force that, yes, can produce flower and butterfly, but at the same time can erupt in volcanic uh,
Hmm.
dramas.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with the earthquakes and the tsunamis and the, all of that for sure. And it's interesting because from the human perspective, again, we can go very mentally into the aspect of things like that happening, right? We saw this with the fires in LA, the very, oh, like what's causing this? Who's doing this? What's like all of this stuff. But I feel like there is, you know, a very pronounced energy of the earth that
Mhm.
intuitively knows when things need to be destroyed or rebuilt, or and we do ourselves a favor by not going into the constructs of the mind around it and literally feel into it and understand. And you would know this from, walking the Bruce Trail all the time. You see the decayed trees and you see like the broken areas, but then you also will see like, the same area 6 months later with flowers and new growth, right?
Yeah. Yeah, we try to shelter ourselves, I think, from the integrative and disintegrative cycles that work hand in glove in the natural world. We
Right.
build these structures where we're not experiencing the entropy side of the equation until we actually get out in it. And
Right.
I had an experience the other night. I was coming along my farmhouse is on the seventh line. It's a rural road, and we had this huge snow squall that had big winds mounding snow in the middle of the road. So I'm going low and slow, and suddenly I'm in a whiteout condition, and I hit this snowbank, and my car is stuck in the middle of the road.
Mm.
And of course, trucks or anything else, I'm a sitting duck.
Right.
I have to be in my body, not in my head, get my shovel out and work, in this case, for about 15 minutes to
Wow.
dig myself out in order to come very slowly back to the comfort of home. And that experience just, it gave me such gratitude for the way a kind of innate resilience works in our human bodies. Like when
Mm.
we're in tough situations, there's a
Right.
kind of almost like an animal intelligence that
Yes.
if we listen to it, it tells us what to do, how to stay calm, how to solve the challenge, how to stay focused, how to breathe and not panic, right?
Right. Yes.
Because if I had just abandoned the car and tried to walk the 4 kilometers home,
Right.
um, the car probably would have caused an incident or accident with somebody else
Right.
who hit the blinding snow
Yes.
and the snowbank. So I do think that when we not just expose, but when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable to the natural world, something awakens in our soul and our being that is very different than the kind of cognitive function that we employ.
Right. And also just, I feel like we've we feel like we have progressed so much, right? We've come so far with the technology and the advancements and all of the but it's all mind oriented, right? And it only makes sense because of that. You know, we have the highest number of diseases that we've ever had on this planet. We've got the, you know, more of our people suffering from mental health things than ever before. And
Mm.
it kind of goes back, you know, the pointers all point to the same thing, which is the mind. Right? So I feel like I'm excited to that, you know, this 2025, the whole age of Aquarius thing, the whole that we're I feel like we are going to be stepping into this new way of being literally by no choice. Literally
Yeah.
by, death or destruction, or, go back to your ground roots of things. So, which is interesting. And so I want to talk to you guys about. So, this is Gary's new book that he has written. And go and check it out. I know that, so it's called Liminality, Traversing the In Between, a guidebook for therapists and expressive arts practitioners. Now, don't let that little, subtitle just like if you are not a, therapist or an expressive arts practitioner, please do yourself a favor and just pick up the book anyways, because there's so much in here that I really feel like pertains to the process we're going through right now as a collective,
Right.
which
Yeah,
is
well, yeah, I do think that while I skewed the writing, the content toward how would a therapist work with an individual going through a major and at times radical change in their life,
mhm,
always in the background was something that you alluded to, that the sense that we, as a body of humanity, are moving through liminal times. The word liminal comes from the Latin word limen, which means threshold. So, as a collective, we, like it or not, we've crossed a certain threshold and there's no going back. Like
right,
the proverbial Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, you
right,
can't go back to the way you were. You can just look around and recognize we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto.
right. Yes. Yes, for sure. I want you, just because I needed to look this word up. It's not a word that I use in my vocabulary. And when I did, I honestly had so many aha. And then, reading the book and going through, but I was like, okay, wow. Like this is so just explain to our listeners the definition of liminality.
Yeah, so I mean the shorthand term is that when we have left the shores of familiarity, whether by something circumstantial or something internal, we find ourselves in that betwixt between state, right? So a classic example would be somebody who has just become a widow. So they've lost the life that they knew in partnership with someone else, and the accompanying experience can be like being lost at sea. It can be the state of ambiguity. It's like me in that snowstorm or fog. You don't feel like you know your direction, and also whatever the new life is hasn't quite arrived yet. So much of our myths and stories are based around that theme of liminality, where in Joseph Campbell's work, he would have called it the hero's journey. I kind of stayed away from that term because hero has been corrupted, certainly by the Hollywood filmmakers, to
Right.
become something like superhero, so that we get this sense that we can barrel through circumstances and tough stuff. Whereas the liminal traveler is often characterized more by vulnerability and tenderness and not knowing and not having an awareness of their superpowers and strengths.
Right. And again, and it goes to show you, I feel like, one of the other things that we're going to be coming through big time in this new awakening process is the unprogramming of things. And so language has been, something that they've used forever since the beginning of time to program us and make us feel certain ways. And exactly what you're saying with that, with the word hero, I understand fully why you were like, well, no, this is a better, right? Because of the way people feel that word, the frequency around it.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I wanted to get your um, feeling, your intuitiveness on this as I was reading your book. And every time I would come through that liminality, like the idea of being in between experiences, being in between, you know, rebirth and, death, and that whole spirit just kept on saying to me, purgatory. So the energy of purgatory. So if you were to try and I didn't look up the actual, the root of the word purgatory, but if you were to explore that meaning with us and kind of see how they're trying to show us, what would you get from the purgatory and liminality being the same kind of idea?
So again, I would defer to story and myth. So, for example, in the Greek myth of Persephone, there she is, this young maiden prancing about in the meadow in the spring of her life with her friends, and suddenly she's abducted from the topside world and taken to the underworld. So we can see a kind of parallel to that sense of purgatory, this for her, which became a hellish experience initially, because she wasn't going as a calling. She wasn't going as a kind of sensing that this was part of her vocato, her path.
Right.
Instead, Hades brought her down. And I think that all of us at different times in our lives have this experience of being brought down, of being dragged down into a realm that is not of our choosing, that has a kind of theme of darkness and death attached to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But in her case, she was apprenticing, she was being shaped and molded by her life in a realm that she did not choose to exist in. So much so that Persephone became the queen of the underworld. And eventually her calling was to greet souls as they left their mortal life, right? So she would give the pomegranate seed and a kind of honoring and schooling and mentoring of those individuals as they um, entered a state of liminality. But also in the myth is this sense that she spends half the year in this darkened realm and another half coming up to the topside world where um, she can be with friends and family. So it's a kind of reference to what we were speaking of before, that interplay that we see in nature, that at times we have to let some things go to ashes. We have to
Mm-hmm.
allow certain things that are no longer relevant disintegrate. And maybe some part of our being has to actually be brought low in that regard, has to, like the proverbial phoenix, where
Right.
things turn to ash. There can't be the rising up of some new form or some new awareness unless we're willing to go into that womb-like state.
Yeah. And I feel like an important message for anybody that's listening right now that is in one of those, darkest times, or we hear the term dark night of the soul, very popular in the spiritual community, that I feel like if we can adjust our perception of the darkness, then that will open up the envisioning, the compass that we need to be able to continue on the purpose of our journey of why we're here. I know for myself, it's very much the way you just explained that story. And this was just recent, I'm 53 years old, and just 2 years ago, I hit the bottom. I'd had a spiritual practice, my whole life. I've been professionally working with clients for 15 years. So, I had all of the ducks in a row. I wasn't somebody who, was struggling without a connection or faith, and it still happened to me. So I didn't choose to go there, not in full awareness anyways, but I was brought there to the, to what I call the experience of the dark night of the soul. And when you're in that depth, it's very hard to see the light.
Mm.
It's very hard to have that, that full alignment of all your beings and be able to rationalize and say, okay, I understand there's a purpose to this. I understand. Because for me, there were many, many, many moments where it was like, I give up. What's the purpose of this? Like, other than to try and take me out, what's the purpose of this? And it's interesting because you write in your book about this, and I'm so thankful for my husband. He's, such my soulmate, my anchor, my rock, because through all of this, and I was bedbound for a really long time. My physical body was just, it was kaput. And my husband would come in and he would say to me, "You're just in this now, but you won't be in this."
Oh, so wise, so wise. Yeah, I think there's even a biochemical shift that takes place in the midlife threshold, right? That Dante, the poet, said, "In the middle of my life, I found myself in a woods wholly lost." So it's a kind of classic notion that in our midlife, things are shifting and changing as we have to let the kind of um, prior life of young and later adulthood shift and temper us for something that comes next. I know, parallel to you, I was going along with my practices and whatnot, and hit a wall around the age of 50. I had never in my life experienced depression before. I'd experienced, bouts of melancholy and sadness and the kind of grief that comes with a human life. But a long stretch of depression was not in my wheelhouse. So I reached out to someone, a therapist, who, kind of like your husband, was a guiding light. Largely, I'd go week by week. I'd tell my stories. I'd bring the update, and the person held space with that message, as you just enunciated, that this is a this is a phase that you will go through. You can't fight it. You
Right.
can't go around it. There's a request for you to be in it, to experience it, and allow it to temper you and,
Mhm.
in a sense, mentor you at the same time.
Right.
Because I suspect coming out of that, you have a depth of compassion and a depth of understanding now that can serve in your practice with other people who may be going through a tough time, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I know, and I love exploring your work as well, because how it shows me. So in my experience, um I as an empath, as a highly sensitive person, born into a lot of dysfunction as a child, a lot of, traumatic experiences, with my mother being, my father died when I was 3, and my mom was my soul protector, caretaker, and she struggled with life, with addictions, and so all of that. And it's very interesting how, as a child growing up, I would see her emotions, her emotional energy dominating everything all of the time. And somehow in my brain, it made me feel like, okay, so don't be like that. Don't don't be emotional. Don't get, don't allow yourself to become weakened. And that's how I saw her energetically, was weakened. She was I often felt like I was her protector, that I had to be her protector because she was in this weakened state. And what I've come to, learn and explore is that I was constantly pushing down all of those emotions, all of the emotional
Mhm.
energy that I was feeling. I was constantly pushing them into my physical body, and not acknowledging them, and not healing them, and not having compassion and holding space for them. And that accumulation of energy just became pure physical in my body, and I had all these physical things happening in my body, my nervous system, my neurological system, all of that was like system overload, crash time.
Wow.
Right? So it's very interesting, the work that you do with clients, because you bring in, sound, you bring in frequency to help explore that, the stuck experiences that are in the body. And I
Mm.
wanted to ask you, because in the book, and you guys have to read this, because I feel like also, if you read a book very intuitively, right? So not necessarily having to read from one page to the next, you could intuitively just take the book, connect with your guidance team, and say, like, highlight what I need to know right now, and then pop into a section of the book. When you talk about like the rite of passage in the book, and I feel like all three of those things kind of tie in together. They're the same wording, they're different wording, but for the same experience. So we talk about the rite of passage, and then what you write about in here called the monomyth. Can
Mhm.
you explain that a little bit to us, and how that shows up for us?
Yeah. Yeah. So the term monomyth really became popularized again by Joseph Campbell, who, as a mythologist, as a collector of world stories, recognized that we were again and again as a species telling that same story about the departure, the separation from the known world, the road of trials and tribulations that we would need to move through in order to gain new skills, the abyss, which is akin to what we were just talking about, that kind of downturn of our lives where we feel ourselves wholly lost, and the breakthrough to attain the boon or the medicine or the gift that we can then bring back to the community. So that in Campbell's notion was the monomyth. And the rite of passage aspect, I feel, comes into play at particular phases of that journey, right? And
Mhm.
in older cultures, especially indigenous and ancient cultures, they would have these practices at different stages to initiate individuals into the what next. The classic example would be the vision quest that a young person around the age of coming into puberty would be um, tutored, mentored to be able to go out into wilderness, to fast, to pray, to be attentive, to be connected to the old stories, and to be in this kind of altered state wherein there would be an attention to synchronicity, something that would respond from the natural world, whether it be a creature, whether it be a kind of dreamy symbol. And that would then signal that the person has come into a different state than childhood. But I do feel that there are other stages, like we were talking about the midlife point, where we are moving through something intensive that wants to claim us and rename us. And so holding space for somebody in that stage is a kind of, like the elders of old, it is a way of not trying to push anything prematurely, but spiritually and energetically, emotionally and psychologically, creating a kind of crucible for that individual to come to something new, an insight, a direction. And
Mhm.
when we think of therapy, often it's related to dealing with wounds from the past. But a broader definition of that could be this kind of therapeutic context in which we're holding a person who's moving through a liminal journey and
Right.
having having not only, as we were saying before, a kind of verbal exchange with the person, but other forms of interaction that might speak to the soul of the person.
Yeah. And I found it really interesting how you also, in the book, you talk about how the different, how it's not a one size fits all. So when you talk about your midlife crisis and my midlife crisis, they could be two completely different experiences based on your frequency at the time, my frequency at the time. And I just found it interesting how you write in the book about how when you're working with, sound therapy using you can uh, you can bring in different frequencies depending on the state of the being. So meaning, you know, if somebody has more anxiety in theirs, if somebody has more depression in there, you show us and give us an example that because you talk about using a drone instrument as just as an example, right?
Yeah, in many of the older forms of music or sounding, um, individuals and communities didn't work with the same westernized system that we have of chords in our popular music. You know, if you want to write a song, you have a guitar or piano, and you're writing these kind of chordal changes and progressions and whatnot. But older communities tended to use what we call a drone, which signifies a continuous sound. So in my practice of sound work, the drone would represent something that is stable and consistent and a kind of reference to something that is unchanging in the person. So chaos is happening in a person's life, in their mental, emotional state, in their circumstances. But throughout it all, the resilience and resourcefulness of their own soul could be represented by that drone. In Hermann Hesse's novel of Siddhartha, he recognizes that the river is always the river, but the river is always changing, right? So now we've got two complementary aspects. We've got something sonically that holds itself consistently, but
Right.
then we have these other elements that represent change. If I could demonstrate this for you,
Yeah,
just
absolutely.
okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So in India, this is a drone box known as a shruti. So the shruti can be set to different intervals so that it provides a kind of consistent sound like this. I'm going to turn original sound for musicians on. Let's see. To do there we go. So now we have that kind of calming, almost meditative sound. And as a soundwork practitioner, if I was just working with somebody who is going through a grieving process, I might use my voice as a form of lament to help them befriend and be with the subjective material of grief. So the drone is saying, everything's okay, we've got you, we're holding space for you here. But vocally, I might do something on top of that.
Oh my.
Mm.
That I don't even think that I could properly use words to describe the emotional energy that what you just demonstrated. And I hope our listeners go back and listen to that little piece again to show you exactly how, Gary brought in that bass frequency like that, almost like a, okay, so you're standing on the ground barefoot now. You feel that connection. Here's where you are. And even though here's now all those the waves of instability and chaos and all of that coming in making you sway, right? You've got your feet anchored into that bass frequency. That was beautiful, Gary.
Yeah, and again, it underscores that in addition to the beauty of language and its place to be able to communicate and share and express compassion and help a person share their story, in addition to that, we need these other practices and tools. We need poetry. We need
Mhm.
story. We need nonverbal experiences like picture you just painted of standing outside, feet on the ground, just to anchor ourselves, to tether ourselves to the energies
Mhm.
of the earth.
Yeah. And also too, I feel like a new importance that we're starting to learn about as well is the vagus nerves in the body and
Um,
how the vagus nerves respond to simple things like humming, right? Of that vibrational. So just again, it shows you we can heal huge vital aspects of who we are, not just through language or, talking about it, but through simple things like humming or moaning or groaning, right?
yes, yes. And I think those vocal practices put us in touch with a grittier aspect of our being. I
Mhm.
love what you shared about your mother. And I think in our early stages of life, we want mother to be almost like bodhisattva, always forgiving and always caring and always loving. And yet, as we mature as children, and as the mother matures, she enters darker, deeper, wilder aspects, almost like the crone.
Right.
So we see this Baba Yaga kind of figure that's not always pretty and not always about beauty, that can be raw and can be a force at times to reckon with.
Right.
And rather than try to put the genie back in the box, I do feel that all of us can learn much more about the ways of the wild woman, that there is a kind of instinctual and ancestral component that starts to come through in those later stages of life. I had a Scottish grandmother who used to speak in the old Gaelic tongue every once in a while, and she was from, the that time in her life where she birthed her kids on the kitchen table in a stone cottage. So, and she would make her own soap. And as a modern kid, she was an enigma to me. And I
Mhm.
I regret now that I didn't kind of get to know more of that rougher, tougher side of her, because she
Mhm.
had she had backbone, she had knowledge, she had uh, even wisdom about what to plant and what herbs to use. That kind of that,
Yeah. So much
like,
strength, right? So much inner
in a
strength.
good sense, yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, thankfully, even though we don't, if we don't have the opportunity to get to know our ancestors in this particular lifetime, because of energies we inherit their good stuff and their bad stuff. So all of that is definitely flowing within you. I wanted to just, as we come into this, because on in your book on page 46, you've got here under the sound work and stillness, and I found this. You write, stillness provides an ideal condition for knowing what our soul life is asking of us. One of the classic techniques that we humans employ to avoid a summon from our soul is to get hyper busy. By ramping up the velocity or intensity of our outer lives, we leave little space to hear, let alone respond to the soul's urges.
Mhm.
I feel like that just sums up where we are collectively, energetically.
Uh, as chaotic and as upsetting was that pandemic period that we went through, a lot of people in isolation began to take up contemplative practices, right?
Right.
They weren't having to rush off to work. They couldn't. And so mindfulness practices began to come in. People began to practice what is it like to be still, and not just to calm the mind, but to orient listening to a different question or a different source of guidance within. So I,
Mm-hmm.
I I do feel that some of these untoward times that we move through often have gifts. And one of the practices that I think is beginning to find its way even into the school system, with kids starting their day with just some breathing or some quiet time, uh,
Mm-hmm.
can begin to activate other centers that have been fairly shut down in our consumer society.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll see this, in classrooms now, and teachers intuitively know this because a huge population in their classes now are on the spectrum. They're on the spectrum. So they're having to know, well, I have to up my game on how to settle my class and bring their attention in, because the tapping on with the ruler and on the chalkboard's not cutting it anymore.
Sure, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You also on here, so on page 61, just in the chapter called Crossing the Threshold, you write in here about paying attention. And so you write, a First Nations elder who lives in your home province of Ontario once gave you this guidance: pay attention to the auspicious clues. So tell
Mhm.
us, Garry, what are the auspicious clues? How do we pay attention to those in our lives?
Yeah. I defer to the pioneer psychologist Carl Jung in that regard, and some of his um, budding awareness caused that separation with Sigmund Freud, who was much more in his head. But Jung was open to mystical experiences. Jung had this notion that when we're sitting with a question, a dream, an emotion, something that is surfacing in us, that there will be a reflection of that experience out in the world. So the young person going through the vision quest, for example, is searching for a new name, which is to say, a new identity. And suddenly a bird flies by at just the right time, and that person recognizes that they will be known as. So there is that um, trust
Mhm.
that signs and cues and affirmations will show up in our lives. And these are the kind of golden opportunities for us to stay alert to. Um, Sometimes not in the package that we uh, once wanted or
Right. That we
preferred.
expect it. Yeah. To, yeah.
Yeah. Like there's this story of uh, a Greek story of a prince whose uh, father is away and he's been left in charge, and these marauders are just creating chaos. They're taking over, and they have no sense of integrity or duty, and he's just lost in his sorrows. And he's wandering along the beach, which again is that liminal space
Right.
between,
Between here and there. Yes.
and he comes across this old sailor. And this old sailor's been at sea and has the knowledge of how to handle the tough stuff. And he looks like an unlikely uh, ally or a companion for this young prince. And his name is Mentor.
Uh, of course.
And that's exactly what he does. He mentors this young person in how to handle the situation. And so sometimes when we're looking and yearning for someone or something that will provide guidance for us, it may not show up in the form that we thought. We were expecting the guru in the white robes from India,
Right.
uh, and instead there's this nasty old librarian who says, I've been watching you come in and the books that you're taking out. I think you should read this.
Right. Right.
And, and so, yeah, that's that notion of paying attention to the auspicious signs and not dismissing the things that seem to be completely out of left field.
Yeah. That's,
And you do this in your work, right?
yeah. Well, I was going to say, one of the things when I'm teaching my classes or working with clients one on one is everybody has kind of like a vibrational receptiveness to them. And so when I'm working with somebody and spirit's giving us information or guidance, and I can feel energetically that the client is very closed or very pulled back and not receiving it, it shows us that there's work there to be done on the whole surrendering of what you feel is ideal or necessary, right?
Yes.
Which is very much in the mind. It's very much our ego and our pain body that says to us, okay, so here I am at point A, but I want to get to point B. That means I have to do one, two, three, four, five, all in order, and it has to look like this. But of course, it's not it's not a straight and narrow walk at all.
For sure, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I just there's when you on continuing in this chapter though, the crossing the threshold, you write this, and this goes into this as well. So when we come to the threshold place, we encounter guardians who prevent and protect. When we cross the threshold, we encounter forces that serve to minister, give support to, and educate us the unknown. Sometimes these helpers provide assistance in the form of showing a direction, like the white markings on the Bruce Trail. You talk about when you're walking through the trail, how somebody will mark and I feel like this is important for everybody to hear because I don't think you can hear it enough that even when you're listening to this podcast and you're listening to the words that Garry uses and the words that I'm saying, allow yourself to like be drawn to the highlighted parts of things.
Mm.
I feel like if we come into these, because you could read a million books and watch a million podcasts, and when you're doing that, ultimately you're just getting somebody else's perception on things. And so intuitively, if we kind of explore that and say, you know what, I'm a very intuitive person. Maybe I haven't read a book yet, or I'm not a musician, or I'm not a dancer or a poet, but I know as a soul, I'm very intuitive. So if I put my guards down a bit, surrender, release, one of the big life lessons we're all working on, and just allow certain parts of conversations to kind of flow over to me, and then I can explore them and be like, oh, okay, that's for me. That's helpful right now. I feel that. And I feel like if you guys go in and you read Gary's book and you take it with that kind of intention, that you will find that there's so much healing to be found in the book, more so than just the words that are written there, for sure. So there's one thing. Do you have a copy of your book that you can that you I would like you to there's I want you to read something, and I want you to read it. First I thought I'll read it because I had so much fun reading it. I again, it was like it just took me out of my space and time and really opened up so much. But I want you to read it so you can go through and take us on that little bit of a journey. But I wanted to read this part, and I want you to talk about this. You wrote on here, this is in the beginning. And so this is a chapter called Disorientation. It's on page 3 in the beginning. And you see, I realize talking about sound is like writing about dance. Something gets lost in the translation. Oddly enough, my practice of sound work is based on the premise that sound can serve us when words fail us. And that's beautiful because, again, it's like, having 3 teenagers, they're not teenagers anymore. They're now, 21, 20, and 18. But you'll know this as a parent. Lots of times you can I say things. I want this done. Do this. It has to be like this. And they don't receive it. It's right. Their receptors are off. But I feel like if I can get, a bit more creative and send them a song, or, get them to listen to or play this frequency for them, it'll allow them to kind of open up to it and receive it a little bit more. So that's if you guys are interested in the stuff that Garry does, we'll have all of his links in there. The website we'll have, not here yet. The website's not here yet.
I think any day, because
Okay.
I'm working on it.
Beautiful.
But you
But you
can,
can find Garry. He's on Facebook, and there's other stuff around him for sure. So you will get to explore, and come better weather, we'll see you at more live events and doing as we come out of the winter hibernation. So I would like you just to read us this. It's a poem that you've written called Arrival.
what page is that on?
So it's the very first page.
Okay. Yeah,
So right
so
after the contents, it's called Arrival. And I ask you to read this just because I feel like for anybody who's going through something that's really trying right now, and maybe you're calling it the dark night of your soul, maybe you feel like it's your hero's journey, maybe whatever you're calling it, whatever you're in, just I feel like it brings great comfort to know that we've all been in these markers before. We've all been there, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. It does show up, and in this, the poem, this Arrival poem, I felt so many moments of reflection reading that, where I could go into my life experiences and be like, yeah, you know what, I've been in that moment, I've
mm,
felt that moment. And when I was originally in that moment, it probably was bringing up like my weaknesses and my sadness and my rage and but now, because I've healed through those moments, I can now stand and read that, be taken back into those moments, and I feel a difference in myself, a difference in my soul energy.
Yeah, I feel your sharing removes the veil of shame. The
Yes.
individuals who have dedicated their life and their energy to a spiritual practice or a way of being in the world sometimes can carry a cloak of shame when things erupt or when
Mhm.
things go south or where chaos steps in, rather than recognizing that there are these cycles of the soul. There are these times where the way is clear, and there are also these liminal periods where something has shifted, and not to berate ourselves, not to beat ourselves up because something doesn't seem to be neat and clean anymore.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
that's what this poem is intended to do, is to kind of take these universal experiences, but also to leave the reader or the listener with a kind of inquiry. So
Mhm.
it says, perhaps it arrived on a commonplace day, after the hungry cat stirred you, or the alarm shocked you into today's waiting list. Maybe it arrived in the middle of the day's muddle. Did it barge in like a thunderclap on a sunny day? Was it a phone call from the doctor's office? Did you find a handwritten letter on the kitchen table? Did someone stop breathing? Did your business partner betray you over a nice lunch? Maybe it came quietly, like wind dying and sails flapping wearily. However it entered, your surrounds looked the same, but you stood in a place where familiarity gave way to mystery. You felt the desert sand beneath your feet, and only a single thought crept up from the void. It was wrapped in terror and wonder. It asked, what now?
Beautiful. Beautiful. And that's what now, right? That's the what do you the $2 million question. What now?
Right. Yeah.
And that's, and I feel like that's, again, people sometimes feel like on the spiritual path or the spiritual journey that there is like a beginning and an end to it. But for, us that have been, doing this for a long time, I think one of the most helpful tools we give ourselves is that permission to say that there is no beginning and no end.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. And also that notion that there can be this kind of contradiction, it seems, that um, there's something only the person can do by themselves. There's all your powers of listening and concentration and attentiveness and your spiritual practice are really your province. You have to enact those skills and practices, etc. But at the same time, which seems contradictory, you can't do it alone,
Right.
right? You have to
Right.
find your and be with your community, your loved ones. The Irish had this beautiful term called anam cara, which means soul friend, right?
Right.
Somebody who you don't have to explain yourself to. They just get it. And they're not going to give you good advice or bad advice. They're going to listen. They're going to be with you. They're going to hold space again in those um, difficult times, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you touched down in that. So on in the chapter called Disruption, you have it's called Solitude and Sound. And you talk about that. And I feel like many of us have felt like that. I know for myself in this, in that time, in the darkest time of that, even though I had my husband and my family and, friends, and I felt like I was by myself,
Definitely. I
and
mean,
with purpose though.
yeah, I mean, you watch people who, again, who have had a major loss in their life. There's a kind of reclusive energy. They pull away from events, they pull away from communities. They're not reaching out to say, I can't even make soup.
Right.
So those of us who become aware of a person in those transitional times, we have to be really proactive and let them know I'm thinking about you. I'm holding you in my prayers. And more practically, I'm bringing you over soup.
Right. And it's a big deal. And and I had a good friend who brought me soup during that time that I was, and there's something in that act of, because again, you touched on it a little bit, and I'm sure that Spears is telling me to bring it up again because somebody needs to hear this, but we do have a certain, an altar that we kind of put ourselves all on,
Mm.
especially those of us who, are in the public eye, and where, we stand up to be helpers, teachers, guides, gurus, whatever it may be. We have this like false sense of, I can't show up for anybody else if I'm not perfect. If I'm not 100% perfect, then I can't show up. And God forbid I should actually be truthful and share and raw when I'm going through the dips and when I'm in a, less than enlightened moment in my life. And so I feel like it's really important for us all to, Spirit will say this to me, come out of the spiritual closet, come out of the, behind the, and know that since the beginning of time, those that have, chosen the path of liminality, the soul's journey, the dark, that who go through that, it serves a greater purpose than just their own. And so that purpose, when we share it with the collective energy, then they can reflect on it and be like, oh yeah, I heard Garry and Jody talking about this, and I'm going through that, so I can now release the frequencies of guilt and shame around it, and embrace the frequency of surrender around it.
Yeah. One of the one of the lovely stories that I included in the book was a Native American teaching story about jumping mouse. And I won't give it all away because, um, but it is one of those teaching stories that says just when you think you're being of assistance and help to someone, maybe some really troubling things happen to you, but you have to retain that faith and tenacity and perseverance in the longer journey, because some of these things that are untoward and push us way beyond our comfort zone have a gift innate, inherent in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because I can remember a long, long time ago, I was just having a casual conversation with a friend. We were walking through another friend's uh, barn that had horses in it, and we were touching the horses and talking, and I something was happening with the horse, and I went into, the thing that I do, which is like, well, let's explore the meaning of this and why it's, and my friend very seriously said to me, you realize that not everything needs to serve a purpose, right? And I was like, no, I did not realize that.
Uh,
Yes. So this, I we could probably sit and have
yeah,
this conversation for, we could, on and on. So Garry, we will have to have you back. We'll bring you back and explore all of this. And in the meantime, you guys go and get his book. So it's available on Amazon. You can go, and I love Amazon because it makes life easy. I don't care what anybody says about. But check out, so Liminality, Traversing the In-Between, Garry Diggins. You will, your intuitiveness will thank you for picking it up and exploring it. And as always, my friend, this has been such a pleasure. Love sharing space with you.
too. Yeah, I felt like we were stepping into that timeless state where, every once in a while you have to look at the clock. Oh my goodness.
Right. Yes. That's always a good sign. When time disappears, you know that you're on the right path. That's perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for listening, and we will connect with you again. Garry, thank you so much.
All the best.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Collective SOULversations Podcast. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen, and we hope that you found our chat both inspiring and thought-provoking. Your support means everything to us, and we're excited to keep this journey going with you. So make sure that you subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so that you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed today's conversation, we'd love for you to leave us a review and share your thoughts in the comments. Your feedback helps us grow and connect with more wonderful listeners like you. Until next time, stay curious and keep those soulversations flowing.